Echoes of Regret. Location, Fairview, Ohio. Story. Kira Lawson had watched her fair share of thriller movies and studied the art of suspense in various forms. She could always pinpoint when the tension was building up, a jump scare here, a dramatic twist there. But as she stared at the lifeless figure sprawled on the asphalt, she felt a horrifying jolt of reality that no film had managed to capture. The man, perhaps in his late 20s with shaggy dark hair, lay motionless with a faint smear of blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. His unblinking eyes captured Kara's gaze, reflecting her own turmoil. This was not a screenplay, this was real life. And she was somehow involved in a situation that felt utterly surreal. Panic rose within her. Should she flee? No, an instinctual voice warned her that running away would only complicate matters further. She was already tangled in a nightmare she could scarcely accept, a hit and run, or was it worse? Steeling herself, Kara stepped out of her car, her heart racing not just from fear but from the additional weight of guilt. She dropped to her knees beside the body, her hands trembling. She had not intended for this to happen, but intention seemed irrelevant now. With a heavy heart, she dragged the man's body from the road, his form heavy and lifeless as she pulled him into the shadows at the edge of the woodlands where no one could see. Fresh regret echoed within her, screaming that everything was wrong. A week later. Alexander. Mr. Harris, I wish I had better news. It's been nearly a week, and we still have no leads on your son, the officer said, his tone gentle but firm. Alexander's heart sank at the mention of his father, Warren Harris. His father was not just a source of pride, he was his rock throughout the storm of self-acceptance. Coming out as gay had not been easy for Alexander, especially after losing his mother to illness, but Warren had shown unconditional love and support, attending every LGBTQ event and social gathering without hesitation. Thank you for trying, Alexander muttered, his voice thick with emotion as he turned towards the door, fighting the urge to break down in tears. Something deep inside him refused to accept that his father would just disappear. Alone in his room, Alexander collapsed onto his bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. He reminisced about lighter days, scrolling through his phone to find a photo of him and his father at last year's Pride Festival. They were both beaming, the love between them palpable. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the house, startling him. Alexander jumped up, his heart racing. It sounded like something had fallen in the kitchen. Dad, he called out, worry gnawing at him. No response. Instead, the house began to tremble slightly. Kira. The tremors struck without any forewarning. Kira staggered, her heart racing as her belongings rattled on the shelves. A loud bang erupted nearby, and she yelped as she stumbled backward into her coffee table, pain shooting through her back. As fragments from her broken window rained down, a gust of wind swept through her home, howling like a banshee. She clutched her arms around her head, bracing for something, anything to stop. After what felt like an eternity, the shaking subsided. Pale and shaken, she stumbled to the bathroom, the chaos in her mind reflected in the messy surroundings. Rushing to the mirror, she was taken aback by her own reflection. Cuts and scrapes decorated her face like an unfortunate mask. Why is this happening? Kira muttered to herself, unable to process the series of unfortunate events that led to this moment. Venturing outside to assess the damage, Kira found her street devoid of sympathy. Neighbors whispered remarks, and a few chuckled, assuming she had staged an elaborate prank to justify the destruction. Kira, dear. What caused all this ruckus? Shouted Mr. Thompson, the elderly neighbor, peering at her with a mixture of concern and unsolicited judgment. It was an earthquake, she insisted, but the words felt hollow. Alexander. Meanwhile, Alexander's heart raced as he surveyed his own space. It looked like a tornado had swept through. Yet, the rest of the house remained untouched. Confused, he rushed to find his mother, who emerged slowly from her room. Are you okay? He asked, concern etched on his face. I'm fine. The words trailed off as her gaze landed on the mess surrounding them. No, I mean, did you feel the earthquake? He pressed, bewildered. What are you talking about? She asked softly, searching his eyes for understanding. There was no earthquake, Alexander. Frustrated and desperate, Alexander stomped back to his room, overwhelmed by the shadows of grief and confusion that clouded his mind. Kira. Inside her house, Kira was left reeling as more people came to offer false comfort. She wished for the chaos to stop, to understand why things were spiraling into madness. Lifting her eyes to the bathroom mirror, she froze as she noticed something alarming written in what looked like rust-colored streaks were the words, "You will pay." Her heart skipped a beat, dread washing over her. What was real? What had she done? Echoes of regret echoed in the corners of her mind as the boundaries between guilt and uncertainty blurred. Kira. Kira stood frozen, her mind racing with fear and disbelief. The dripping words on the mirror seemed to pulse with a life of their own, a sinister echo of her conscience. You will pay. It felt like a sentence, one that she didn't know if she could escape. Deep down, she understood the implication. The guilt of her actions was manifesting into something more terrifying than she had imagined. Her instincts screamed at her to flee, but where would she go? The very walls of her home felt like they were closing in, suffocating her with memories of the night she couldn't forget. Kira stumbled backward, her heart pounding as reality settled heavily in her chest. She had to make sense of what was happening, to face the gravity of her situation. Taking a deep breath, Kira tore her gaze away from the cursed mirror and fled outside, hoping the fresh air could clear her muddled thoughts. The community around her was still buzzing, seemingly unaffected by her turmoil. They were going about their lives, dismissing her very real fear. Kira! Shouted Mr. Thompson again, a concerned frown on his face. You look like you just saw a ghost. Are you certain you're all right? Do you really not feel it? Kira cried back, frustration spilling over. Everything is falling apart. There was an earthquake, and then, everything. The bewildered look on his face reflected the disbelief that everyone else had shown. Perhaps you need to sit down, dear. Maybe you're just overwhelmed. No. I am not overwhelmed. I need help. She shouted, her voice ringing through the air, cutting through the chatter of her neighbors. But deep inside, she realized she was alone in her struggle. The consequences of her actions weighed heavy, and no one seemed to perceive the undercurrent of chaos threatening to swallow her whole. Alexander. Across town, Alexander picked up pieces of his shattered world, both literally and figuratively. He sat on the floor, surrounded by the remnants of his belongings, confusion and anger coiling in his chest. There had to be an explanation, an earthquake or something. Why wasn't anyone else acknowledging it? With each passing moment, he felt the walls of his grief closing in tighter. He picked up the broken frame that had held the cherished photograph of him and his dad. If only he could hold on to that happiness just a moment longer. As he glanced at his reflection in the shards of glass, he felt a shiver run down his spine. The image echoed his sorrow. It was then that he noticed a shadow moving just outside his window. Curiosity mingled with dread as he approached the cracked glass, peeking through a jagged opening. The streets were bustling, people milling about as if unaware of the weight bearing down on him. But something caught his eye. Kira was outside, her expression frantic as she gestured to the crowd gathered around her. Though he didn't know her well, he sensed she was in distress. Forcing himself to break free from his own turmoil, he pushed open his door and hurried towards her. Kira! He shouted, making his way through the throng of people. He caught her eye, and for a fleeting moment, he saw recognition and relief wash over her. But just as quickly, fear clouded her face again. Alexander! I need you to help me! She exclaimed, urgency in her voice. What happened? Are you okay? He asked, scanning her face for signs of injury. There's something in my house, something wrong. I think it knows what happened, she said breathlessly, her eyes darting back at the structure as if it had become a haunted entity. Let's go inside, he said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're not alone in this. Together, they stepped onto Kira's porch. As they entered, an oppressive atmosphere greeted them, thick with tension and despair. The remnants of their respective internal struggles intertwined in that space. Kira! Inside, Kira gestured toward the bathroom mirror, panic evident in her eyes. I don't know how, but I saw something written there. You will pay. Alexander frowned, his brow furrowed with concern. Let me see. He moved to the bathroom and examined the mirror. Although the surface was merely fogged with grime, there was no trace of the ominous message Kara had described. Are you sure it was here? He asked gently, trying to understand. Of course, I'm sure. It wasn't just in my head. I feel it. You have to believe me. The frustration lacing her voice hinted at her desperation for validation. Before Alexander could respond, a sudden chill clawed through the room, rattling the doorframe. Both of them turned, instincts on high alert. A sharp crack echoed from the hallway, and Kara's heart raced. The discovery. Maybe it was a sign, Alexander whispered, piecing together the chaos that had enveloped them. Maybe there's something in your house that connects to what's happening to me. It can't just be coincidence, Kara agreed, her voice trembling. What if it's somehow tied to what I did? I've been feeling it ever since that night. Then we need to find out. Together, Alexander said, determination shining through the fear. The kitchen, the living room, every corner of the house became their battlefield as they searched for answers. As time passed, they combed through forgotten corners and dusty shelves, but everything felt futile. Just as they were losing hope, Kara's gaze landed on an old trunk tucked away in the living room. It seemed oddly placed and out of character for her decor. Let's look in there, she suggested, her fingers trembling with a blend of anticipation and dread. As they opened the trunk, the contents revealed a collection of old letters and photographs, each one telling a story of the past, memories of loss and hidden secrets. Among them, a crumpled letter caught her breath. The truth revealed. With shaky hands, Kara unfolded it. The neat handwriting detailed the struggles of someone who once lived there, someone who had faced loss and guilt. Each word resonated with her own emotions, intertwining her present with the haunting past. Kara, look at this, Alexander said, holding up a faded photograph. It was a young man, joy sparkling in his eyes, standing with his friends at an event that looked remarkably familiar. Is that? Kara strained to see the name scrawled at the bottom. It looks like it's from the Pride Festival. Yes, but this doesn't make sense, Alexander muttered, deep contemplation crossing his face. That's my dad. Kara froze, the implications washing over her like a wave. Understanding now dawned on her. This letter, it was written by someone connected to your family, wasn't it? I think so, he breathed, recalling stories of connections shared between their families that both had brushed aside. Maybe he carried the weight of secrets, and somehow, they're still lingering here. Just then, the air around them twisted, as if the house itself was responding, the temperature dropping suddenly. Kara and Alexander exchanged glances, realization dawning, they both were tied to this haunting. Together, she whispered, determination igniting within. If we confront the truth, we can find a way to break this cycle. It has to end. Gathering their courage, they stepped closer to the trunk, ready to face whatever dark shadows lingered within the memories that hovered about the space. Let's uncover the truth, Alexander said firmly. No more running. The two of them began sifting through the letters, guided not by fear but by a fragile thread of hope. As they read deeper, the weight of the past bore down on them, the echoes of regret seeking resolution. Unraveling the narrative, they could sense the lingering energy transforming from anger to understanding, leading them closer to the peace they both so desperately needed.